Welcome back everybody to the Ace Simulations channel. Today we're going to be going through all of my FS2020 settings and configuration for both the graphics and then also setting up the secondary screen with the multi-monitor support. I'm running SimUpdate 10 beta. The actual SimUpdate 10 is going to be released later on in August, and right now I'm doing an early access so I can begin testing it. All my settings are going to be based on an HP Omen 17 laptop. I'm running a 10th gen i7 as well as a RTX 2070 with Max Q. All this is then through an SSD, a 512GB SSD as well as a hard drive. With the entire sim, I'm running that main laptop as well as 4 other microcontrollers. I have one microcontroller controlling all the switches. I have another microcontroller running the radio panel here. I have another one running the entire control system. And the last one runs the servo-powered instruments as well as the whiskey compass. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the new SimUpdate 10. The only thing I wish is there were a little more configuration settings for the side views. Having the ability to zoom in and out would allow me to set the actual wrap-around immersion. It would make it a little bit more realistic that way. Hopefully that'll come in a later update, and as it is right now, it's still incredible. So with all that, let's go ahead and get into it.
Alrighty everybody, welcome into the simulator. I'm spawned in at Kilo Mike Delta Quebec. This is an airport in Alabama, and right now I'm running a rainy preset. So we're going to go ahead and check out the settings, which right now are giving me 30 FPS rock solid, and that's on the gaming rig with the specs I gave a little bit earlier. So let's go ahead and hop into settings here. So we're going to go into the general options. So I'm running a main display here, which is a 1080p display. I'd like to have the resolution a little bit higher, but right now it works. This is a slightly lower resolution display, but it's kind of thereabout in terms of actual pixel count. I am running SimUpdate 10 beta, so this gives me DLSS, which I am running the quality preset of with the AMD Sharpening set to 100. That's kind of the best balance for visual quality for me. VSYNC I have on, and I'm locking it to 50%. This is a 120 Hz panel, so I'm locking it to 60 FPS. Running DX11 because DX12 is still having some issues even in SimUpdate 10. So now the biggest performance hit that I've seen is with the terrain level of detail. So this I have set to 50. As performance increases, I can increase it back to 100. That's what I used to run it at. Once I added in the screen here, I had to drop it to 50. But that alone basically changes your FPS quite significantly. Off-screen rendering is set to low. I'm not doing super crazy pulls and stuff like that, so the popping is not as noticeable when I'm flying mostly straight and level. So for the most part, that works for me. Terrain vector data, I have that set to high. Buildings are ultra, trees are medium, grass and bushes are also high. Those ones don't have huge performance impacts other than buildings. Buildings does have a performance impact, but the ultra adds in a whole lot of other visual elements to the buildings, which I think are kind of a need to have for the realism there. So I have that set to ultra. Objects level of detail, this is kind of similar to terrain level of detail. I usually run it at 100, I dropped it to 70. Again, that's kind of the best performance there, and both those settings are changing the distance at which it'll render into the high quality model of. Volumetric clouds, I have this set to high. It gives me a small performance increase, but also when I'm running clear skies as the weather preset, it makes it look a little bit more like high level clouds, and I think that looks rather nice. And when I'm running an actual weather preset, it's not too noticeable between high and ultra, so I just leave it at high. Texture resolution, I have that set to ultra. Anisotropic Filtering set to 8 times. Texture Supersampling I have 4x4. Texture Synthesis is ultra. Those ones don't change a whole lot. I don't have them maxed out just because I don't really need them to be. Water waves, I do try and fly near coastlines a lot, so I have that one turned up. Actually, I can run that one on high. So that's what I'll normally run it on, and that's the detail in the actual water. Shadow maps, 1024. Terrain shadows, 512. And then contact shadows. Since I'm flying in the cockpit view, I don't have like any of the actual panels showing, so that's the contact shadows is the actual lighting in the cockpit. Since I'm not really seeing that, I have my own cockpit here, I don't really need that, so I have that cranked down. Windshield effects, that's going to provide all the rain effects on the screen that you'll see. I think that's pretty good, so I just have that set to ultra. Ambient Occlusion, I have that set to high. Cubemap Reflections, 192. Raymarched Reflections, ultra. And those two right there are going to be the reflections off the water, so like buildings in the water, stuff like that. Light shafts, I have that set to ultra as well, and then bloom I have on. Everything else I have off, and then for the actual display refresh rate, I have that set to low. The only thing that I'm using that's going to need that is the Raspberry Pi screen here, and having it set to low is not a huge thing for me. I'm not checking it that often. So that kind of gives me the best performance with the best visual quality for the sim I'm running. Normally I can get around 30 FPS on the ground, and depending on where I'm flying, as high as 60 FPS in the air. For traffic, I use real-time online. It does have a rather large performance impact, but I just kind of have it set real-time online, and then I have lots of ground aircraft. That's about all I'm running. I don't normally run developer mode, but I have that on right now. Just see, I have the FPS counter up, which I'll read out as you fly. So now with Sim Update 10, the other big improvement is the window views. So now that I have that update out, I can add this window here. It's pretty easy to do. What you'll do is in the experimental tab, you'll see multi-window. You just click add new render window, and then you'll get some options. When you run it the first time, it'll only show up as 1. When you load it back in, it'll show up as 2. I think that's just probably a small bug. It's not actually changing what it's rendering. So just make sure you set your resolution correctly. That'll be a big performance thing there. And then also set it to full screen or windowed if that's what you want. I have it on full screen because that makes the most sense for my setup here. Lateral rotation offset, that's going to be the angle between your screens basically. So mine's 90 degrees, so I have it set to -90. That'll have me looking out the left side here. Vertical rotation is kind of the pitch of the screen. I have it set to -10. If it's at 0, you're going to see a little bit too much of the wing. So at least in the high wing. In a low wing, having it set to 0 is probably okay. And in roll is, it's the roll kind of like how the horizon is going to be aligned. I have that set to 0, doesn't really need to be changed. So those are about all my settings. If you have questions about those, leave them below. I'll answer them. And in the description, I'm going to have the guide that I used, did all the benchmarking for. I benchmarked a lot of this stuff myself as well, but where I started off, that guide I'll have in the description. It's very helpful. So let's go load back into the sim. And I'm going to set it to scattered showers. And even after I do a big change like that, still setting pretty solid at about 30 FPS. A little bit higher sometimes. One thing, having the screen here with the windshield effects looks absolutely incredible. So that's a pretty cool effect that I wasn't expecting. So we're going to go ahead and start up the airplane here. I'm going to make sure parking brake is set. I'm going to go master switch on, beacon on, holding the brakes, fuel pump on, 1, 2, 3, off. I realize I need my fuel shutoff valve on, fuel selector on both. Now fuel pump on, 1, 2, 3. Throttle set to 1000 RPM, friction lock set. Set our flaps 1 notch. This switch just controls the sim pause, so I need to make sure that's off. And we can set our altimeter, HSI, and then we're going to go start. Good start. And you can see now that the engine is running, the prop wash is pushing the water back, and so you see that reflected in the windshield effects there, which is super cool. Alternator is going to come on, and the avionics. You can see my avionics stack will come alive. My annunciator panel, of course, that will work here. Turn on my nav lights. And then turn on my ELT to armed. When I do that, it also just turns on my Hobbs meter. I don't have the Hobbs meter wired directly into the sim. I'm going to tune 122.8. I'm not actually flying on an active VSYNC server at the moment, so it's not doing anything, but this airport usually is a Unicom airport. Alright, turn on the taxi light here. You can see in the window here, you can actually see the taxi light illuminating the ground, which looks pretty cool. And I'm going to go back to the weather here. And I'm going to soak the ground real quick because there's another effect that's pretty cool. And I'm just starting to turn here, get up to the taxiway. Normally I'd push back, but not necessary in this case. So. Alright, so one cool thing with FS2020 is after it rains, the ground will still have puddles, which looks absolutely incredible with the reflections. So that's why I keep the reflections a little bit higher. Alright, we're going to go ahead and taxi over here to the runway. It's still maintaining about 30 FPS, pretty good. And this is another fairly intensive graphics thing it has to do because it's calculating all the reflections of the puddles. One thing I wish is that you could manually set puddles. You cannot do that, unfortunately, which is a little bit disappointing. So after you wait a little bit, the puddles will quickly evaporate and then you don't have the water. So yeah, and the water's already all gone, unfortunately. There's the bloom effect there, which looks absolutely incredible in FS2020. Really happy with the graphics in this sim, as well as the physics. They're actually pretty good. After they did the big CFD update for the 172, it added quite a lot to the realism, especially in the 172. Has much more accurate performance to real life. Looks like we have some AI here, not sure what they're doing. I'm just gonna go into the grass here to go around this AI sitting. I do wish that the AI in the sim was done a little bit better. There's a lot of room for improvement, unfortunately. I usually fly in FS2020, which helps fix that, but, or sorry, VSYNC, which helps fix that. Not on VSYNC right now, though. So one cool thing also with the having the second screen here, as we ignore the AI that's currently doing spins on the taxiway there, is when taxiing, you get a lot more depth and sense of speed with having that screen there, which is a kind of cool thing I wasn't expecting. It also makes taxiing, I think, a little bit easier for turns, because you're actually able to look out and kind of cross-check like you would in real life. So normally I would stop here, do my run-up. I'm not going to do that because I'm just trying to demonstrate things and FPS in this video. And I've maintained a pretty solid 30 FPS this entire time, which is pretty cool. So strobe lights coming on as well as the landing light. Mixture is going to go full rich. Make sure my friction lock is off, which it is. And on runway 36 here. And we're going to go full throttle. Wind's pretty much dead, and while I'm running the clear skies preset, you can see that on high there's some pretty cool cloud effects. I think that looks pretty realistic. And off the ground there. Accelerate up to 70, that's what we'll pitch for. like I said, with the new CFD for the 172, CFD meaning computational fluid dynamics, and that's this new prop wash, or rather propeller simulation that they're doing, ton more realistic. There's actually a correct climb rate now modeled. The airplane accelerates and decelerates a lot more realistically, so I'm really happy with the way that turned out. Some cool effects there going off little puddles, or rather the little ponds. We're going to keep on climbing a little more. Now we're going to turn base, rather crosswind, sorry, crosswind. And now that I'm up in the air, I'm around 33 FPS, so I gained a small bit, but pretty much solid still. And with flight simulation, having, you know, mid-30s is fairly okay, as long as it's smooth. And that's one thing these settings are optimized for, is it's super, super smooth. It feels like you're at, you know, 70, 80 FPS just because of how smooth it is. The latency is really nice. And I'm going to turn downwind here, which another thing is, as you fly, you have out of your peripheral vision another kind of supporting element, so that adds a ton of realism there as well. And also being able to cross-check with the runway here during my turn, I can make sure, you know, that I'm actually rounding out where I need to be. Alright, I'm going to pull my power back. Right now we're on downwind. I'm going to level off, turn off my landing light. I'm going to keep my flaps at 1 notch. And we're pretty much trimmed for hands off. So now I'm flying level on downwind. This is a really good place for testing because there's lots of different kinds of objects. You have hills, you have a big airport, you have lots of towns, lots of trees, lots of roads. So it kind of covers every aspect of the sim. And right now it's about 33 FPS, pretty solid. And I'm just going to keep flying a little level here, and then we'll get ready to turn base and final for landing. So with the settings that I'm running, like I said, it's super, super smooth. And with my setup, I'm being limited by the main thread mainly. So when you build a computer, I highly recommend you get a really good CPU and RAM and storage. That'll keep your CPU fed, having good RAM and storage. I'm running 16 gigs of RAM. And right now I'm only using about 3 gigabytes or so to feed the CPU, so that's pretty good there. And my GPU is 8 gigs, I'm only using about 3 gigabytes again there. Alright, I'm going to pull the power, let the nose drop. I'm going to go to 1000 RPM and we're going to turn crosswind. Considering this is a beta, take all these performance values with a grain of salt. I'm sure it'll be a lot better in the official release, at least that's how it's been in the past. I'm going to drop another notch of flaps, landing lights coming on, and we're going to roll out here. So now that I have this screen, usually I kind of got to guess my way in, but now I can actually look and see the runway, judge a lot more realistically when I need to actually turn, make my turn for a final. So there we go, I'm going to start turning to fun. A little bit high, so I'm keeping dropping down. Nice neighborhood down there, looks really realistic. Some cars driving, looks super cool. And we're going to round out on final here. A little bit of a crosswind. I'm going to go full flaps. And with that bloom effect here, it adds a lot more realistic effects on the panel as well, because when you have a really bright window here, it'll actually reflect off the panel, giving a lot more kind of dimensional lighting, which adds, I think, a whole lot to the realism. Still rock solid, 30 FPS, super smooth still. And I'm slowing to 50. Power's coming to idle. And into the flare. When flaring, it's another cool effect because you have a little bit more height perception as well. Basically, overall, having the screen, there's just tons more perspective, and kind of like it's a more three-dimensional feel when you're in the sim, which is a pretty big deal for me. I think that's kind of one thing about building a sim like this. You want good depth perception, basically, and having a peripheral vision view almost kind of adds a lot there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the flaps up, and then once I get past the line here, I'll switch off my strobe light and landing light. Shadow looks pretty cool there as well. And we're past landing lights coming off, strobe lights coming off, taxi lights coming on. I can pull my mixture back as well. And still, FPS really, really strong at about 30. And if I were to go fly in a much more rural area, that was more just trees, just, you know, farmland, aka somewhere out in the middle of Kansas, my FPS would normally be a lot higher. But for where I am right now, this is probably the best benchmark I think I can do. Of course, if you're in a major city like New York, it'll be a little bit lower. But even previously when I flew the sim in New York, I was still getting above 30 FPS. Alright, we're going to turn back in here to the FBO. This airport's not custom model, this is all just auto-generated, which is pretty impressive considering it's auto-generated. But in a custom airport, you could have a slight performance drop, maybe like 1 frame or something like that, but very minimal. I also tested a whole bunch of, I'm running Windows 11 with this as well, and I tested a bunch of different settings in there, and I found that for the most part, the settings for Windows 11 don't change a whole lot. And we're going to stop here. I'm going to set the parking brake. Turn off the landing light, make sure my throttle is set to 1,000, which it is. Friction lock is going to be set. Turn off my nav light. Turn off the avionics. See the avionics panel go dead. Alternator's coming off. And I'm going to pull the mixture and turn off the magnetos. And then beacons coming off and master switch. And then I can also install my gust lock here. It doesn't actually do anything, it's just a paper clip with a remove before flight pin on it, but it allows me to practice the procedure. If I redo this panel, I'm going to make mounts for the yokes because they're a little bit loose. Plenty fine, but I would like that to be a little bit more precise there. So, alright, so now we're completely shut off here, still solid at 30 FPS, and that's like really good considering I'm running this on a laptop. The laptop's powering 4 screens, so I have a 1080p screen here, 1080p screen here. This is a really strange resolution, as is this too, but they're both basically 1080p. So 4 1080p screens, which the laptop can run just fine, so it's pretty incredible.
Alrighty everybody, that'll conclude this video. I hope you guys enjoyed and found it quite informative. And also in the description I'll have links to the guide that I used for all of my tuning of these settings. So leave any of the questions you have below and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. And I hope you guys enjoyed. See you next.